to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, a quiet place where your day can soften and drift away. And tonight you'll wander through a spring market at dawn, where lanterns fade, blossoms wake, and gentle mysteries unfold in the morning mist. Take a moment to settle in, exactly as you are. Let your shoulders lower, as if they've been holding something heavy for far too long. Let your jaw unclench. Let the space behind your eyes grow smooth and calm. If it feels good, allow your hands to rest with open palms, as though you're giving yourself permission to receive rest. Breathe in slowly, drawing the air down into your chest, and then a little deeper into your belly. Hold it for the briefest pause, and breathe out with a quiet, easy release. Again, a soft inhale and a long exhale, as though you're sighing out the last lingering thoughts of the day. As you listen, you can imagine that each breath is a small tide. It comes in, it goes out. Nothing to solve, nothing to chase, only the gentle rhythm of being here. Now picture the first light of morning, not bright yet, but tender and pale, a sky washed in pearl and faint lavender, the hush that lives just before sunrise. You are walking toward a market that appears only in early spring, when the world is newly green and the air still carries a clean chill. The cobblestones beneath your feet are cool, and a thin mist curls around your ankles like a curious cat. Somewhere ahead, you can hear soft voices, the clink of cups, the faint rustle of canvas awnings being unfurled. With your next exhale, let yourself step into that calm. Let your mind loosen its grip. And as the scene grows clearer, as the sounds become gentler and more distant, you don't have to hold the story tightly. You can simply float along with it. And now, without any effort, the viewpoint shifts like a lantern, being carried from one hand to another, and the story begins to follow someone else. In the small town of Briarwell, spring arrived the way a whispered secret arrives, slowly, sweetly, and all at once. It began with the scent of thawed earth rising from the gardens, with the first crocus lifting its bright head through a veil of last winter's leaves, with the river, which had been quiet and restrained for months, suddenly speaking in a more lively voice, chattering over stones and carrying thin shards of ice away like forgotten mirrors. Briarwell sat in a shallow valley where soft hills folded around it, green at their edges and shadowed in their folds. The town was old enough to have grown comfortable with itself. Its roofs were moss-dusted, its windows small and warm, its lanes narrow and friendly. In daylight it was pleasant, with bakeries and bookshops, and a bell tower that rang at gentle hours. But at dawn, in early spring, Briarwell became something else. At dawn, the spring market appeared. Not every morning, Only on certain mornings, when the air had that particular clarity and the clouds were thin as silk and the birds began their singing in a careful, expectant way. The market did not announce itself with posters or trumpets. It simply arrived as if it had always been there, and everyone had only just remembered to notice. The people of Briarwell spoke of it quietly, as though speaking too loudly might startle it away. They said it gathered in the old square while most of the town still slept. They said the stalls were set up with no sound of hammering or strain, as if canvas and wood moved of their own accord. They said the goods smelled of wild places and distant gardens, of rain on leaves and honey and comb. And they said the market had rules, not the sharp kind of rules that bite, the gentle kind, like the rules of a lullaby. Come early, walk softly, pay with fairness, leave with gratitude, and above all, if you found something you didn't know you needed, accept it without asking too many questions. On one such morning, when spring's breath was still cool against the skin, Mara woke before her alarm bell. It wasn't a loud waking, more like a ripple stirring her from the inside. She opened her eyes to dim gray light, to the calm shape of her room, to the faint hush of the town outside. For a moment she lay still, listening. The world sounded different at this hour. The usual daytime noises were absent. No carts, no chatter, no clatter of doors, only the soft creak of a house settling, the distant murmur of the river, and the wind brushing along the eaves. Mara sat up and pulled a shawl over her shoulders. The shawl was old and comforting, woven with threads the color of warm oats and dried lavender. She slipped her feet into shoes and moved through her cottage with the careful quiet of someone walking through a dream. Her cottage was on a narrow lane that led toward the old square. She lived alone, though not in a lonely way. Her work kept her company. She was a binder of books, a mender of spines and pages, a restorer of quiet stories. Her hands were patient and her eyes were trained to notice small details. A tear at the edge of a page, a loosened stitch, a fading title. Perhaps that was why the market called to her, or perhaps it was simply the season. Spring had a way of tugging at hidden threads inside people, drawing them gently toward change. Mara lit no lamp. She didn't need one. The window showed her a pale wash of dawn, and the air itself seemed to glow faintly as if it held its own dim lantern. She stepped outside and closed the door with a soft click. The lane was wrapped in mist. Not thick, not frightening, just a silvery softness that made everything feel quieter, rounder at the edges. The cobblestones were damp beneath her shoes, and the air held that clean scent of wet stone and budding green. As she walked, her breath came out in small clouds. She kept her steps unhurried. There was no need to rush. The market would be there, waiting in its own timeless way. Along the fences and garden walls, early blossoms trembled in the cool breeze. Snowdrops had already come and gone, their work finished. Now there were primroses, small and bright, and clusters of blue that looked like spilled sky. Somewhere a bird called once, then fell silent, as if listening for an answer. When Mara reached the old square, she found it transformed. In daylight, the square was a simple place with a fountain at its center and a ring of shops around its edge. At dawn on a spring morning, it became a soft, lit world of canvas and lanterns, herbs and flowers, whispering voices and slow smiles. Stalls curved around the fountain like petals around a heart. Thin lanterns hung from wooden poles, their light gentle and golden, as if it were made of honey rather than flame. The lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze, and their movement made the shadows sway too, like calm breathing. Canvas awnings were striped in faded colors, sage, cream, pale rose, tones that belonged to spring itself. Some awnings were decorated with small bundles of dried herbs tied with string. Others had wind chimes made of sea glass and shells, which made the quietest music when the air stirred. The people moving among the stalls did not speak loudly. It was as if the market asked them to keep their voices low, to match the hush of the hour. Some wore coats and scarves, some carried baskets, some held steaming cups, cupping their hands around warmth. Mara stepped into the market with a sense of gentle awe. She felt, in a simple and wordless way, that she had entered a place that existed beside the ordinary world, not far from it, but slightly shifted, like a melody played in a different key. A stall near the entrance sold bread that smelled as if it had been baked in the heart of a hearth. The loaves were round and dusted with flour, and beside them were small rolls filled with spring onions and soft cheese. The baker, a woman with kind eyes and flour on her sleeves, offered Mara a thin slice. "Warm enough?" the baker whispered, as if even kindness could be loud. "Warm enough," Mara whispered back, and accepted the bread. It tasted like comfort, like slow mornings and safe places. She chewed thoughtfully, feeling the warmth spread in her chest. She wandered onward. There was a stall draped in green cloth, piled with herbs, mint and thyme, rosemary and lemon balm. The air above it shimmered with fragrance. Behind it stood an older man with hair like dandelion fluff. He held a small bundle of lavender and tied it with a ribbon. "Good for sleep?" he murmured, and smiled as if he could already see sleep arriving, gentle as a cat at dusk. Mara nodded but did not buy. Not yet. She wanted to walk first, to let the market unfold its offerings like pages turning. Near the fountain, someone was selling jars of honey. The honey caught the lantern light and glowed amber and gold. Next to the jars were small candles rolled from beeswax, their surfaces patterned like tiny honeycombs. A young person with a soft face was polishing the glass of one jar, making it shine. Further along was a stall that held small potted plants, each one wrapped in moss and twine. Some were seedlings no taller than a finger. Some were tiny trees with delicate branches, bonsai-like, their leaves a careful green. A little sign hung from the front of the stall, written in neat script. For beginnings, for patience, for gentle growth. Mara paused there, letting her gaze rest on the plants. She thought of the books she repaired, how they too were living things in their way, carrying growth and change through time. A voice, low and calm, drifted toward her. "Do you feel it?" Mara turned and saw a woman standing at the edge of the stall. The woman wore a cloak the color of wet bark, and her hair was braided with small white blossoms. Her eyes were a clear gray-green, like water in shade. "Feel what?" Mara asked quietly. "The way the morning holds its breath," the woman said. "The way spring wakes up slowly, like a child stretching. The market arrives on mornings like this, when the world is willing to listen." Mara felt an unexpected smile touch her mouth. "I suppose I do feel it," she said. "I just didn't know how to name it." The woman nodded, as if names were never necessary. They walked side by side for a few steps, without speaking. It felt natural, like two leaves drifting in the same current. The market continued around them, soft and luminous. At one stall, a potter was arranging cups and bowls glazed in pale colors, cloud white, pond blue, soft green like new leaves. Each piece looked as though it had been shaped by hands that moved slowly with care. The potter poured tea from a kettle into small cups and offered samples. The tea smelled of chamomile and apple peel. Mara accepted a cup and held it close, feeling warmth seep into her fingers. When she drank, the flavor was gentle and bright, like sunlight filtered through leaves. It did not ask for attention. It simply offered calm. The woman in the bark-colored cloak accepted tea as well. They sipped in silence, listening to the faint music of the market, murmurs, chimes, the soft splash of the fountain, the whisper of canvas in the breeze. As they moved on, Mara noticed something odd in the air. It wasn't a sound. It was more like a subtle change in texture, as if the mist had grown slightly thicker, or the light had become a shade more pearly. The lantern seemed to glow from within rather than from flame. The woman beside her noticed too. "The market is deeper today," she whispered. "Deeper?" The woman's eyes softened. "Some mornings it is only a market. On other mornings..." She let the sentence trail off as if it didn't need an ending. Mara felt no fear, only curiosity, smooth and quiet. They came to a stall unlike the others. It was smaller, tucked between two larger stalls, as if it had always been there and had simply been overlooked. Its awning was plain linen, unstriped, the color of dawn itself. No lantern hung from it, yet it was softly lit. The light seemed to come from the objects displayed there. On the table lay items that were difficult to name. A smooth stone that held a faint warmth, as though it had been resting in sunlight. A bundle of reeds tied together, humming almost imperceptibly like a distant harp string. A small bottle filled with something that looked like fog. And there, near the front, was a book. Mara's attention moved toward it without her choosing. Her hands tingled as if they recognized it before her mind did. The book was not large. Its cover was made of soft leather dyed a deep green, the color of shaded ivy. There was no title, no author's name, just an embossed pattern of curling vines that seemed to shift slightly when Mara blinked, as if the vines were alive in a quiet way. Behind the stall sat an elderly person wrapped in a cloak that looked like layered petals, pale, overlapping, softly shimmering. Their face was calm and lined, their eyes gentle and clear. Mara stepped closer. "May I?" she asked, though she wasn't sure what she meant. "May I touch it? May I open it? May I understand?" The elder nodded once, slowly. Mara reached out and rested her fingertips on the book's cover. The leather was cool and smooth, and beneath it she felt a faint pulse, like a heartbeat heard through a pillow. Not loud, just present, as if the book was quietly alive. She lifted it carefully. It was heavier than she expected, not in weight but in presence, like holding a small piece of a forest condensed into an object. When she opened it, the pages were blank. Not blank in the harsh way of empty paper, but blank in the way fresh snow is blank, full of possibility. The paper was creamy and thick, edged with a faint shimmer, as if dusted with pollen. Mara turned a page, still blank. She looked up at the elder. "It hasn't begun yet," the elder murmured. "What hasn't?" "Your spring," the elder said. Their voice was like wind through reeds, steady and soft. "Some springs arrive loudly, some arrive in secret. This book is for the kind that arrives quietly." Mara felt something inside her chest loosen, as if a tight knot had been gently untied. "I don't understand," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she needed to. "You don't have to," the elder replied. "You only have to carry it. The pages will fill when they're ready, not with ink necessarily, with what you notice, with what you allow yourself to feel, with the small awakenings you might otherwise ignore." Mara looked down at the blank pages again. In the lantern light, no, not lantern light, something softer, she thought she saw the faintest hint of an image like a reflection in still water, a suggestion of a branch, a curve of petals, gone as soon as she tried to focus on it. "How do I pay?" she asked. The elder's smile was barely there, like the crescent of a moon behind cloud. "With a promise." "A promise?" "A simple one," the elder said. "When you wake, you will look for the first beautiful thing you can find, and you will let it matter, even for a moment." Mara felt the truth of that request in her bones. How often had she walked through days with her mind full, her gaze lowered, missing the quiet beauty offered freely by the world. How often had she saved her attention for what was urgent, leaving little for what was gentle. "I can do that," she said. The elder nodded. "Then the book is yours?" Mara held it close, feeling its cool cover against her palm. She closed it carefully and tucked it under her arm as if it were something fragile and precious. The woman in the bark-colored cloak watched, her expression thoughtful. "It chose you," she murmured. Mara blinked. "Does it choose?" "Everything here chooses in its own way," the woman said. "Some choose loudly, some choose like mist, settling where it will." They moved on, leaving the small stall behind. Mara felt different, though nothing outward had changed. The market still murmured, the lanterns still swayed, the fountain still whispered water into stone, but inside her something was shifting, softly, gently, like a bud opening in slow motion. They stopped at another stall where someone was selling ribbons. The ribbons were wound on wooden spools, each one a shade of spring: butter yellow, pale green, blossom pink, sky blue. Some were embroidered with tiny patterns: leaves, stars, curling waves. The vendor, a young man with freckles, held up a ribbon the color of dawn and draped it over Mara's wrist. "For tying things gently," he whispered. Mara smiled and bought it, placing a few coins on the table. She wrapped the ribbon around her wrist once, not tight, just enough to feel it there, a soft reminder. Nearby, a stall offered small sachets filled with dried petals and herbs. Another sold glass beads that looked like captured drops of rain. Another displayed tiny carved wooden animals, each one smooth and warm in the hand. As Mara wandered, she noticed that the market seemed to expand and contract in subtle ways. A lane between stalls seemed longer than it should be. A corner she turned brought her to a place that felt farther away, as if she had stepped not only through space but through a thin seam of time. The air grew more fragrant, more alive. She and the woman in the bark-colored cloak came to a stall that sold only bowls of water. That seemed strange at first until Mara saw the bowls more closely. Each bowl was made of dark stone, polished to a soft sheen. The water inside was perfectly still. Above each bowl hovered a faint shimmer like heat haze, though the air was cool. A sign written in delicate script read, "Morning Reflections." The vendor, an older woman with silver hair and a gentle face, gestured toward the bowls. "Look," she whispered. Mara leaned over one bowl. In the water she expected to see her own reflection, perhaps softened by the dim light. Instead, she saw a meadow. It was a meadow she did not recognize, filled with tall grass and white flowers. The sky above it was bright and clear. A breeze moved through it, and the flowers swayed, each one nodding slowly. Mara's breath caught, not with fear but with wonder. The meadow looked so real she felt she could step into it. She glanced at another bowl and saw a different scene. A forest path with sunlight falling in leaf-shaped patches, a small stream crossing it. Another bowl showed a quiet room with a window open to rain, a candle burning on a table, a book lying open. The woman beside Mara looked into a bowl and smiled faintly, as though she had seen something familiar. "What are these?" Mara asked the vendor. The silver-haired woman's eyes crinkled kindly. "Not futures," she whispered. "Not exactly. They are possibilities the morning carries. The kind you can walk toward if you want, the kind you can ignore if you're busy. Mara felt the book under her arm like a steady presence. She looked again into the bowl that had shown the meadow. Something about it felt like rest, like a deep breath, like a place where her mind could be spacious. She straightened slowly, letting the image linger without trying to hold it too tightly. "Thank you," she murmured. The vendor inclined her head, as if thanks were simply another form of quiet. They moved on. As the sky lightened, the market began to change again. The lanterns dimmed a little, their glow less necessary now the dawn was arriving fully. The mist thinned. The birds grew bolder, their songs more frequent. Somewhere someone began to play a soft instrument, perhaps a flute, perhaps something older and stranger. The notes were slow and floating like petals on water. They drifted through the square and seemed to settle into the stones themselves. Mara found herself standing near the fountain, watching the water spill over the edge in a continuous, soothing motion. The woman in the bark-colored cloak stood beside her. "You come here often?" Mara asked. The woman's gaze was on the water. "When the season calls," she said, "when I need reminding that the world is kinder than it sometimes seems." Mara nodded. She understood that even a quiet life could become cluttered with thoughts, worries, little burdens that gathered like dust on shelves. Sometimes you needed a place like this, a place that brushed the dust away without scolding you for having it. The woman turned to Mara then, her expression calm and gentle. "You have the book?" she said. "That means you're meant to carry something back with you. Not just an object, a way of seeing." Mara looked down at her hand, resting on the book's cover. The embossed vines seemed to curl slightly beneath her palm, as if they were listening. "I will try," Mara said. The woman's smile was like the first sliver of sunlight. "Trying is enough," she whispered. Then, as quietly as mist dissolving, she stepped away. She moved into the flow of the market and was gone, not in a sudden way, but in the way a dream figure disappears when you blink. Mara did not feel abandoned. She felt accompanied by the morning itself. She wandered again, alone now, letting her footsteps be slow and unplanned. At one stall, she bought a small pouch of tea leaves that smelled of jasmine and young grass. At another, she accepted a tiny sweet, soft as a cloud, flavored with rose and honey. At another, she found a small jar of jam made from early strawberries, pale and fragrant, as if it held spring sunshine. Each purchase felt less like acquiring and more like participating, like adding her own quiet thread to the tapestry of the dawn. As she moved, she noticed the market vendors beginning to pack away certain items. Not hurriedly, but with a gentle efficiency. Canvas was folded, ribbons were rewound, bowls were covered with cloth. The market was preparing to vanish, not in sorrow, but in completion. The elder with the petal cloak was still at the small stall, watching quietly. Mara felt a pull to return, just to look once more, to confirm that the book was real and not something her sleepy mind had invented. She approached and saw that the stall was already half empty. The stone and reeds were gone. The bottle of fog was gone. Only a single sprig of green remained on the table. Perhaps rosemary, perhaps something wilder. The elder looked up at her. Mara hesitated, then opened the book. The pages were no longer completely blank. On the first page, faint as breath on glass, was the outline of a lantern. On the second, a suggestion of ribbons drifting in air. On the third, the curve of a meadow's horizon. They were not drawn in ink. They were more like impressions, like memories becoming visible. Mara's throat tightened with quiet emotion. She did not know why it moved her so much. Perhaps because it felt like proof that the small moments mattered, that what she noticed could leave a mark. The elder nodded, seeing her expression. "It begins," they murmured. Mara closed the book gently. "Thank you," she whispered. The elder's eyes were kind. "Remember your promise." "I will." She stepped back, and as she did, the stall seemed to soften at the edges. The linen awning looked thinner, like mist. The air around it shimmered. The elder's form remained calm and steady until, with no drama at all, the stall was simply not there. In its place was a patch of open stone, damp with dawn. Mara exhaled slowly. The market around her continued to thin. People began to drift away, carrying baskets and bundles, cups and jars. Their faces were peaceful, as if they had all received something they hadn't known they needed. The lanterns dimmed further, then went out. The awnings folded themselves with the soft sigh of cloth. The chimes became still. And then, like a tide receding, the market vanished. Not in a flash, not with a sound, just gently, as if it had never been separate from the morning in the first place. The old square returned to its usual self, empty, quiet, simple. The fountain remained, singing water into stone. The sky above was brighter now, pale blue, with a hint of gold at the edge of the rooftops. Mara stood for a moment, holding the book under her arm, ribbon on her wrist, tea and jam in her bag. She felt as though she'd been given a gift that was not heavy, not complicated, but deeply real. A breeze passed through the square, carrying the scent of wet earth and budding leaves. It touched her cheeks like a cool hand. Mara began to walk home. The town was waking. A door opened somewhere. A window creaked. A faint smell of baking bread drifted from a distant kitchen. The bell tower did not ring yet, but it felt as though it was preparing to. Mara's lane was still quiet when she reached it. The mist had mostly lifted now, leaving the world clearer. Tiny drops of water clung to the tips of grass and the edges of leaves, each one a small mirror catching the new light. At her garden gate, Mara paused. She remembered the promise. When you wake, you will look for the first beautiful thing you can find, and you will let it matter. Mara let her gaze soften. not searching in a sharp way, but allowing the world to offer what it would. Her eyes moved over the damp stones, the small patches of moss, the curve of her own fence, and then she saw it. A spiderweb stretched between two posts of the gate, newly made, beaded with droplets. The droplets caught the dawn light and turned into tiny jewels. Each one held a small upside-down world. The sky, the fence, the suggestion of blossoms nearby. The web itself was delicate, almost invisible, except where the light touched it. It looked like a piece of lace woven from morning. Mara felt a quiet smile settle into her face. She let it matter. She stood there for several breaths, simply looking, letting the beauty be enough, letting it fill her gently like warm tea. Then she opened her gate and stepped into her garden. Inside her cottage, the air was cool and still. She set her purchases on the table, the tea leaves, the jam, the small sweet wrapped in paper. She hung her shawl on its hook. Then she sat by the window with the book in her lap. Outside, sunlight was beginning to touch the rooftops. The world had shifted from pearl to gold. The river's voice was clearer now, more lively. Mara opened the book again. The pages showed faint impressions of the morning: lanterns, ribbons, meadow. On a fresh page, slowly, as though emerging from fog, a new shape began to appear. It was the spider web, not perfectly detailed, but suggested. A delicate pattern, a scatter of bright points, where droplets had been. Mara's breath slowed, her shoulders softened. It was as if the book was saying gently, yes, this too. She closed the book and rested her hand on its cover. The vine pattern felt calm beneath her palm. She didn't feel the need to do anything more. No urgent plan, no big decision, just a quiet willingness to notice. Mara made herself a cup of the jasmine tea. She watched the steam rise in thin, curling ribbons. She listened to the faint sounds of the town waking. Footsteps on stone, a distant greeting, the soft clatter of a shop opening. She drank slowly. The warmth moved through her. Her eyelids grew heavy, not with exhaustion, but with comfort. The kind of heaviness that comes when you finally stop holding yourself rigid against the day. She carried her cup to her chair and sat, letting herself sink into its familiar shape. Outside, the garden held still, damp and fresh. Inside, the cottage felt like a nest. Mara's thoughts began to drift, slow and unimportant. The market's lanterns, the bowls of water, the elder's voice like wind through reeds, the meadow in the reflection, waiting quietly somewhere in possibility. She imagined that meadow now not as a place she had to reach, but as a feeling she could carry. A wide space inside her, where the air was clean and the flowers nodded gently. A place where nothing demanded and everything simply offered. Her breathing slowed further. In her lap, the book rested like a calm animal, warm in its own quiet way. The ribbon on her wrist was soft against her skin. The morning light grew steadier. Mara's head leaned back against the chair. Her eyes closed. The world did not ask her to stay awake. It allowed her to drift. And as she drifted, the market seemed to return, not as a place in the square, but as a softness in her mind. Lantern glow behind the eyes, the scent of herbs in the air, the hush of dawn like a blanket being pulled up gently. Her thoughts became fewer, like leaves settling to the ground. Her body became heavier, like a stone warming in sunlight. Everything in her loosened. The river outside kept speaking, steady and soothing. The garden held its quiet shapes. Somewhere far off, a bird sang again, and the sound was round and soft, like a pebble dropped into still water. Mara slept. And perhaps in her sleep, the book's pages continued to fill, not with demands, not with loud stories, but with the faint impressions of beauty. A cup of tea, a spiderweb jeweled with light, a meadow that waited patiently in the folds of a dream. Now, as the story quiets, you can let your own breathing become the only thing you notice. In and out, slow and easy. Imagine the pale dawn light turning softer, dimmer, gentler, as though it's wrapping itself around you. Imagine the market's lanterns fading into a warm blur, the murmurs becoming a distant hush, the fountain's water smoothing into silence. Your shoulders can sink, your hands can rest, your thoughts can drift like mist, lifting from cobblestones, thinning until they are barely there. If any image remains, let it be a simple one, a delicate web of droplets catching light, each drop a tiny jewel, each jewel holding a quiet world. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, only rest. The air is calm, the night is kind, the bed beneath you is steady and safe. And as sleep comes closer, you can let it arrive the way spring arrives in Briarwell, slowly, sweetly, and all at once. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.